You on in our set of messages looking at the life of David and what it was about David that made God himself call him a man after his own heart. And so for this morning scripture, just a little look into the life of David. Beginning in Samuel chapter 25 verse 1, now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him in his house at Ramah. Then David rose and went down through the wilderness in Paran. And there was a man in Naon whose business was in Carmel. The man was very rich. The man was, he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. And he was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife was Abigail. The woman was discerning and beautiful, but the man was harsh and badly behaved. He was a cannibal. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, so David sent 10 young men. And David said to the young men, go up to Carmel, and go to Nabal and greet him in my name, and thus you shall greet him, peace be with you, and peace be to your house. Peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now our shepherds have been with us, and we did them your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm. And they missed nothing all the time that we were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever you haven't had to your servants and to your son David. And when David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. And Nabal answered David's servants, who is David? And who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants these days who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and my meat that I have killed for my shearers and give it to men who have come from I do not know where? So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all this. Why was David called by God a man after his own heart? We've looked at David's life from a variety of perspectives over the last month or so. One of the things that helped David become a man after God's own heart was his conflicts, the things that happened. They helped to change his life. We learn more from hardships and from differences and from problems than we do from thousands and thousands a day of sweet-smelling roses and flowers and all of those things. God understands our need. We need to somehow come to grips with the fact that in this life we need Him. We're looking to Him and desiring to hear from Him what we need. David was the youngest of 8 boys. I don't know about you, I was the youngest of 3 boys. That's bad enough. But can you imagine being the youngest in a group of 7 older brothers? We often think of the way that we treat those whom we know, our brothers and our sisters. Sometimes what happens inside of a family hurts far more than what outsiders can do to us, just those little words and those little things that we say. I wonder if David experienced, or I really believe that David experienced those kind of conflicts in his life. He was in conflict with Saul. And let's not forget that at the time he was in conflict with Saul, Saul was king. You can have conflicts with all sorts of people, but when it's a conflict with the king, you've got big problems. He was the one who controlled everything. He was the one who looked after everything. He was the one who knew everything. And if he wanted to make you a success and give you lots of power, he could do that. If he wanted to beat you down and just make your life miserable, he could do that as well. And that conflict that David had with Saul helped to turn him into the man of God that he became. In his own life, he experienced lust. He experienced murder. He experienced the conflict and the victory that's contained within all that. As he cries to God, why did I do these crazy things, these dumb things? I need your help, God. Will you forgive me? And he cried day after day and night after night for God to release him from that. And God does. God gives him his forgiveness. What a treat for him, but to know how much time he's lost as he searched for God and been unable to find him because of the things that he has done. Life is complex. It doesn't happen in a strict linear form. There are cause and effect in our lives, but I believe it's more like causes and effects. It would be great, wouldn't it, if every time we got into a situation where we're talking to people or looking at people that we would be on top of the world? Wouldn't it be great if that every time somebody challenged us about something, we would know that we stood on the right side, on the side of truth? But to be honest with you and honest with each other, there are times in our lives where we come face to face with our trials or our troubles and problems, and we can't say with a clear conscience, I've done everything that my God has commanded me. I've done everything that I could to make things right. Quite often we find ourselves in the midst of trials and troubles and those kind of things as well. We are all in process. We're being changed into the image of God if we have Christ in us and God's Spirit directing us. But we're not there yet. And we need to understand that we can't wait or ever attain perfection this side of heaven. I still remember the birth of my oldest child. How many of you remember that day as well? In my generation, we were some of the first who were able to get into the delivery room with our wives. Somehow people thought that was going to comfort our wives, but I'm not so sure how much comfort we gave them during those times. But I remember still being presented with my oldest son and holding him in my arms and looking into his eyes. They say that men do not grow up until they understand and know what it means to give life to another, and I'm certainly like that. My life was changed in that instant, and I looked into those eyes, and I thought to myself, this that we've created, Joyce and I have created, is my responsibility. This is the one to whom I am expected to pour my life out to. Lord, help me. Lord, show me the way. Lord, teach me and help me to help Joyce to raise this child. I wasn't perfect, and I knew I wasn't perfect, but I knew that God somehow was going to work in my life and to work around me. I now have two boys with whom I'm very proud of. I was able to talk a little bit about our youngest, Dan, during our prayer time. Well, what about David? What did his life look like to those who were around him? Well, in this little story, we're introduced to a man named Nabal. Now, apparently this was his family's choice to name him Nabal. In fact, later on, it seems to be not a nickname for him, but a given name for him as well. Some parents, I think, do some things that they perhaps look back on and seem a little foolish. Nabal, the word itself in the Hebrew, means fool. And how many of us want to really call our child fool? Maybe it was a family name. Maybe it was something that great-granddad had and great-great-granddad had. We don't know. But sometimes what we're named, how we're named, it changes the way that we're treated in our lives, our whole lives. Johnny Cash wrote a song about a boy named Sue. You remember that song, I'm sure. And the boy finally comes back after in a terrible fight with his father and said, "Why did you name me Sue?" And the dad simply says, "Because I wasn't going to be around. I wanted to make sure you could look after yourself. So I named you Sue." There's a sense that Nabal's name is something that affects his character. His wife was beautiful and discerning, but he was a little bit on the crusty side. He didn't like to get everything, or he didn't like to give in to people. He's a wealthy man. Really, when you look at the text, or when you look at these words, he's not just wealthy. He's very, very, very wealthy. He's internationally wealthy. He comes from a place called Maon. He's got a business he's got a business in Ramah. There is cattle that he has, thousands and thousands of head of cattle and sheep that he has in a place called Paran. He doesn't have to work very much anymore. He's got it all together. He's made his millions and his millions and his millions. This story is phrased in such a way that we cannot help but to believe that Nabal didn't have one monetary need in his life. He had it all. His business interests were all over the place. Now, he wasn't a king. Kings usually were people who came out of a particular city. That city would be, or that town would build a wall around it. When that wall was finished, there would be a city. That city would take, in that city, someone would take control of the city, and they would become a king to the city. Nabal didn't care about that. Nabal was so wealthy, it didn't matter if it was a king that he had to confront. He could buy kings over and over and over again, and it wouldn't feel, he wouldn't miss a piece of toast in the morning or a glass of orange juice. That's how rich a man was. Now, there's a rumor out there, even in the Christian church, that being wealthy is a sign of the blessing of God. I don't agree with that teaching. I find that doesn't really fit with what I read and what I see in the scripture. But when we start to think that being rich is spiritually light, we're forced to look into the life of a man like Nabal and say, what can we learn? What can we see in this life that will be good for us? And what Nabal's message really is to us is that we're invincible because of our wealth. We're invincible because of our relationship to God. And it's proven because we've got more money than the other guy. We've got more treasures than the other guy. We drive a better car. We send our children to better schools. The truth is that this is a lie. David shows restraint in many of his actions at the time. We need to remember that this whole chapter begins with the phrase that this is the time when Samuel died. Samuel was the last of those with a direct lineage to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, a direct lineage to Moses. He was the one who was the greatest prophet of his day. He anointed kings. He anointed Saul as king, and he anointed David as king, even when anointed David as king, even while Saul was yet king. Nabal infers that David is just like the rest. Oh, you're like all of those other guys. Now that Samuel's dead, you're just trying to take as big of a piece of the pie as you possibly can. You're out there trying to take over from other people the things that are rightfully theirs. You wicked man, you terrible man. What are you doing with those things? Now, David could have done some of those things. But as we've looked at his life, we've seen that David consistently makes choices, for the most part, that are pleasing to God. Rather than use his authority and use his power and use his strength and his leadership abilities to gain for himself, David really seeks to ensure that God's will is the thing that has done. Saul has many opportunities to do things, but he continually chooses the path of grace and of fairness and of honor and humility again and again and again, in spite of the fact that he's guilty of a terrible sin at one point in his life. I think we can read into David's life much more progress, much more closeness to God than we can the things for evil. Now, David sends some men to receive from Nabal some food. It's part of the culture in the Middle East. If you have, you share with others. If you have and others are hungry, it's a sin. It's a bad thing for you to turn somebody away from your table or turn somebody away from you with not giving them opportunity to eat. If we think that Nabal was going to be stretched thin by this offering, we are forgetting how wealthy Nabal was. He could afford to feed as many people as he wanted to. One of our good friends, he was in our wedding party, had a daughter who married a very important businessman in the Philippines. She's now the Deputy High Commissioner in the Philippines, and it's kind of our honor to know them. And I asked his father-in-law one day, our friend, I said, so how big is this tuna company? And he said, 22,000 employees. And wow. And he says, and every day at 10 o'clock in the morning, they stop work. The whole fleet stops, and they have a time of worship and prayer and reading through the scriptures together. That's the kind of wealth that Nabal would have been able to show. He could have easily afforded it. But he's one of those men that doesn't want to share. Doesn't want to share with the world the blessings that God has given to him. We can look into the history of Canada and the United States. Did you know that Henry Ford was so against unions that he hired people to break the union? That particular little conflict went on for many years. Many people were injured. Some of them lost their lives during that time. Or Thomas Edison, the inventor of the light bulb, who made his millions by stealing copyrights from the people who were working for him. And we think of it and we look at him and say, wow, God blessed him. What a tremendous intellect. What a great person that is. But David looks at Nabal and sees Nabal for who he is. He's a miser. He's cheap. He doesn't want to share with anybody else. And so we find David in conflict with Nabal. He's asked politely. He's asked in a culturally acceptable way. We're here. Would it be possible for you to feed us? You've already got the food prepared. It's just about we'll eat the leftovers as long as we're able to do those kind of things. Nabal says, no way. And David gets upset and gets ready to attack him. Now, like many men of wealth, he marries what I consider to be a trophy wife. Her name is Abigail. And we're told in the scripture that she's wise, that she's beautiful, that she's discerning as well. By the way, the name Abigail means a father's joy. How many fathers here have daughters? Yeah. I know a lot of, I know from dating a lot of girls that being a father's joy, a father's joyfulness is sometimes a block to you getting to do what you want, what you're encouraged to do with his girl, because it's her. She's a princess, and even without royal blood, she's still a princess. We need to understand something about the society of the day. Some people we need not even. Okay, so it takes a special kind of courage to go against her husband, and Nabal is out there trying to keep away from getting in trouble with David, but is not doing a very good job. And she does what Nabal should have done in the first place. In Middle Eastern culture, it's built around sharing food with one another. And it's a form of sacrifice. It's a form of us getting together. A few years ago, we had the opportunity to travel to Africa. We went to visit a little village called Sitanuku. Our son had been there about 3 years beforehand. We went there to give them help as an NGO. We were going to share with them the gospel. We also wrote on some other things that we would share with them. The first time we got there, our son Steve got lifted off the ground and spun around. Joyce thought that he was going to get killed, and he was actually getting hugged and welcomed back into the village. We came back a second time, and they had prepared for us a feast. Now, if you get invited to those kind of feasts, you have to bring things. So we went out, and it was usually a 2-hour trip to get to where we wanted to go. So we began our trip. It actually took us 4 hours. Halfway there, we decided that we needed a goat. So we went out and bought a goat. I went out and bought a 100-pound sack of rice. Went out and bought some vegetables. And the only vegetables that they were able to get in this area of Africa at that time of year were onions and green tomatoes and a few squash and those kind of things. So we put them all on top of one of their little taxi trucks and tied them to the roof and took off. We got to the village around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. One of the village people that our son had contact with visited with us. We talked together. Then they decided that they would prepare a sacrifice for us. Now, Joyce will fill you in on what happened, but we ended up trading goats and with the villagers, and they brought this little goat out, and we watched them go through the ceremonies that Muslims go through in order to create a sacrifice. And they took this goat and they ritually faced it to the east. They didn't want to go east, but they got it to face east. They killed it, they butchered it. All the little boys were looking to see what was happening because it was really interesting for them to see what was going on. And then they took it away to cook it for us. And that was a bit about 5:30, 6 o'clock at night. They invited us to a show. They went through all sorts of greetings with us, dancing and playing all sorts of games and those kind of things. It was a lot of fun. We were very deeply honored by that. Then they decided, well, if we've shown you our things, you could show us your things. So we were going to show the Jesus film, but we didn't have it. So we ended up with a Nigerian Christian film, and it took a long time for us to realize that it wasn't going to play that easily. 2 hours of watching the tape back up and move forward and back up and change on us. We finally decided that was all we could do, so we thought, okay, now we can go off to bed, and Joyce will explain more about that at some time if you ask her. So we went off to bed, but just before we went to bed, which would have been around midnight, they said, the goat is ready, please eat. And so this is a place where there's no street lights or anything like that. So in the darkness, we walk over to this huge kettle, we lift up the lid and shine our phones in there, or our lights in there to look, and you can see all the entrails and the liver and the lungs and everything all on the top, because that's the good stuff, right? And I remember thinking to myself, I'm going to die. They're expecting us to eat everything here, but they weren't. In fact, all we did was each one of us took a spoonful and ate it, and that was enough. That was all we could eat. I think they were glad, because then they could clean up and go to bed themselves. But that was our introduction to that kind of culture. And that's the kind of culture that David wanted. David wanted to come and to make friends, to be not just a visitor, but a part of the fabric of Nabal's life. He wanted to say, this is Nabal, my friend. I want you to bless him and I bless him. And I think that that's what separates David from the crowd. He had position. He had power. He had the right to go on demand. He had the ability to do all of those things without any worry or any cause or concern for themselves. But he chose not to. And God calls him a man after his own heart. May we make good choices as well.